Alright, so the term I want to talk about today is called the mental stack. It's a term that I learned from the FGC and something that I personally use a lot. In previous videos I have used it and I've kind of briefly mentioned it. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because I think it's good to label and define it. We'll get into the details later, but people have mentioned the mental stack before, but they never really call it that. Pretty much every piece of content that you've seen about people talking about what classes you should make, especially for new players, is actually talking about the mental stack to a degree. Alright, so the FGC definition on info.net. How much focus a player can devote to different strategies in a match. And then the rest of this is just a bunch of different examples. But my TLDR of a mental stack is if you look at your focus as a pie chart, for example, you can only give so much of this pie chart to a single thing, so much of your focus to one thing at a time. And the more things that are in there, the less you can focus on a single thing. So I thought it'd be fun to give a couple examples in other genres, and since this is a term I learned from the FGC, I start off with that. So in the background, you're going to see this fella named Vegito. And what it's going to be showing off is all the different options that this character has at round start. And that's not even all, because you can use every single one of these and use an assist at a different time during it and just create a different scenario. That is a lot of things and animations people had to look out for. Like at round start, it's basically a gamble, which is why you'll see people not opt to do anything offensive in a lot of games. They'll actually just back up. Or in the case of this game, probably super jump, float back. This often creates a situation where if you're watching somebody play, you or somebody else is like, I would have blocked that, I would have hit that. But most often, as a spectator, you're not looking out for all those options because you're not about to get hit. So as a spectator, things might seem obvious to you, but the truth is their mental stack was so split on all the other things that they didn't have time or you didn't consider the other one to happen. Sometimes the most illogical, the dumbest thing works because people are so focused looking out for the optimal things. And then for fun, the other option is going to be an FPS. I don't really feel like reinstalling BattleNet, so you're just going to have to use your imagination here with me. And I only really have Advanced Warfare on Steam, which is very dead. So you're leaving a building, you're leaving a lane, and you know across the area is a sniper's nest, a vantage void where people often shoot you from. So being aware that that is a popular area, your mental stack is going to be focused on that, and you're going to, think I can get the jump on them or I want to get away from that real quick. You leave the building and the first thing that happens is you get your legs blown off by some guy in a ghillie suit with a shotgun. When you respawn, what are you going to do? You're going to look for that little rat in a ghillie suit around the floor and just see if he's somewhere else or there again. And then throughout the match, you're going to be looking for that ghillie suit. You're going to be looking for bushes. You're going to be looking your attention downwards more. He has effectively shifted your mental stack to look lower, which in turn gives more advantage to somebody who's sitting up in that sniper's nest because now you're less focused on them. And obviously these two examples are only just one part of the mental stack for their respective genre. Because it's not always about just what the opponent does, it's about what you can do, what you're gonna do, what you can confirm. If it is something you have to think about, something you have to focus on, it is part of your mental stack. Now let's finally move on to Lost Ark, because yeah, this is kind of for you guys. So as stated, this is something that applies to anything that you had to think about or focus on. So this does apply to our PvP MMOs just as much as it applies to these PvP examples that I laid out before. So the major difference is going to be the presence of mind games, which will not exist in a game where you're fighting an AI. But similar to them is the fact that you can kind of break it up as a you versus them, or in this case, your character versus the boss. HP, combat resources, consumables, your rotations, your cooldowns. Maybe you have multiple pages of cooldowns, so you have to look around a little bit more for that. Classes with a specialty gauge where you have to focus on that. Some with like Arcana where you have to focus on a bunch of different cards and make those choices on which ones to use when. If you're playing an EO Sophist, you're going to have to assess the party's damage and kind of where you guys are at to decide what level of hype you want to go into right away. And then there's positionals, which might be your correlation to position to the boss or even to the stage itself, as there are stage hazards. So these are character related things that are going to affect your mental stack. So earlier I mentioned that people actually do mention the mental stack a lot, but they don't reference it as such. And where you're going to see this most is really when people talk about class recommendations for newer players. This is when it kind of hit me that, hey, the LOA community is actually talking about the mental stack. So the Strylander guy, maybe you heard of him. He did a video on class recommendations. In S tier, everything but Knight's Edge, they're very low demanding on the mental stack. Soul Leader he just put out there because it shits out damage. Paladin he put out there because it's the easiest support. And that's really what makes Paladin so reliable to pick up. It is really rare for them to mess up. Which leaves us with Loyal Companion, Reflux, Mayhem, and Predator Slayer. These are 4 builds that don't have to really require too much about their resources. They don't really have that strict of a rotation. While Mayhem does have a damage window behind Red Dust, and Reflux generally fires off 2 skills in pairs, it's not that strict. Now if we look at his D tier for example, Arcana straight up had to deal with RNG and make extra decisions because of what cards they pull, while the other 3 are back attackers with their own little gimmicks. A very quick TLDR of it would be that these all have very low floors, but pretty good ceilings. as Surge basically has the highest ceiling in the game. And because somebody is bound to mention it, there is a common theme also in these kind of recommendation lists, which is Swift class good for new player, Spec class bad. Which this has always been a staple of the game, because spec classes need high quality accessories to have a lot of spec. And on top of that, they're going to need most, if not all, of the wealth runes. But I'm going to be honest, with the Arcadia Tour, I think that is less of a factor overall. But I think that topic is going to be better off left for another video, so let's move on. The other major part of the mental stack is going to be your opponent, the boss. And to be honest, a lot of this boils down to my other examples. Besides major mechanics and bosses, you don't really know what's going to come. So that means you had to learn patterns, you had to learn animations. In most genres, they call this a tell. They are literally designed and exist just to show you that, hey, this attack is coming. For example, normal Theamine Gate 3, Darkness, Red patterns. To get hit by these is super punishing. That's why they give you a lot of time to react with them. And even though he has more than 2 patterns that he can do in this situation, the common way to handle this situation is to sit 12 and wait for him to do the tell that you want to move to 11 o'clock instead of 12. When you handle something like this, you're effectively reducing your mental stack, because instead of looking out for 4 or 5 different patterns, whatever how many there are, you're only really looking for one. Because when you sit at 12 during the Darkness Red mechanic, or another example in Theamine would be when he teleports and slams down, does the slash, if you move to where he's slashed, you will not be hit by either one of his 2 follow-ups that he has after that. Though keep in mind those clones do exist. But these are 2 examples of something that is very commonly mentioned in the FGC as well. Something I use in my static, and I know they don't understand what I'm saying. This is a option select, which the term of that is to use the same input to cover different outcomes. And those are examples of things that you're probably going to have to be ready for at pretty much any point of the fight. Now, in modes and difficulties where you can actually see the enemy HP bar, the boss HP bar, since major mechanics are tied to how much HP the boss has left, that makes content with health bars easier in the terms of their mental stack. You know when to hold skills or hold consumables because you know something's coming, maybe a big damage window or maybe a staggered destruction. This is what adds a little extra difficulty to Hell mode, is because you don't know any of that information. There are people who know their damage, they know the party damage, they kind of know what it takes to push a mechanic. So there are going to be some players who can roughly expect major mechanics. But also, since damage meters exist, I've heard that there are people who watch the meter, and since they can see how much damage has gone out, they know when the mechanics are going to be coming. Because again, these mechanics happen at a set HP. Since I did mention health bars earlier, I want to mention that your UI design also has a big effect on your mental stack. The more spread out things are, the more you have to look around the screen to look at cooldowns, debuffs, anything like that, is the less time you're spending looking at the boss. So looking around the screen more is going to make it harder to identify patterns. This is why in a lot of FPSs now you see things like ammo counts or just UI things around the reticle. And this is why some games will let you move around your hotbars and everything around, so you can actually focus everything around the center if you so desire. Games where like the screen goes red or you start hearing a heartbeat or something like that when you're dying, they allow you to focus on what's going on in the middle of your screen while still knowing what's going on something that might be happening on your UI. And when we think about audio, having voice, having communications, having a call going on with everybody in the raid, if everybody's focused in and you got a shot caller, it definitely benefits the raid very well. More often than not, people do react faster to audio rather than visual cues. So if you have somebody who is good at noticing things early and calling it out, it definitely benefits everybody in the raid. Because we've all seen it, we've seen those people greed because they just want to pump. And then they did this during a very, very obvious pattern that everybody should have dodged, but they were just so focused on pumping. Now there is a downside. If you overly depend on people doing callouts, you're kind of screwed when you actually are put in a situation where you don't have comms going. But it's very likely you've probably built in some habits that you do to certain animations even when people call it out. So you still probably have a leg up than you would if you were just going into it for the first time anyways. Ultimately, there's really no golden rule to things like the mental stack. In the end, it really boils down to muscle memory, repetition, and just understanding tells and patterns. Most things character and damage rotation wise, they're going to be rough no matter what at the start. But because you keep on playing, because you keep on doing it, you're going to build up the muscle memory and it's just going to get easier and easier. That allows you to allocate more of your mental stack to other things. And in the same vein, the more you do the raids, the more you do the bosses, the more you see the animations, the easier it is to react to them, to see them coming. It's an ever-shifting pie that's going to change all the time. And that's why people recommend classes that are easier on rotations. Because if you learn your character faster, you're learning something that is applicable to all raids. And if you have all that character muscle memory built in, you can focus on watching the boss and their patterns and reacting to it. Because ultimately it is a balancing act. You don't really want to just focus on your character because then you can eat patterns. But if you focus too much on the boss, you're probably screwing up your rotation, or maybe you're not even attacking at all and then you're just kind of griefing. Overall, I just really want to talk to it because these are terms that I use when I'm playing with my static and they don't really have any idea what I'm talking about. And then I'll see a lot of creators and people talk about the mental stack differently because we don't really have it properly defined. But that'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching, like, sub, and I don't really have a relevant question for this video. So who's more sus, Cauttyh or Miso? Let me know in the comments.